You are walking with your family through an ancient landscape. No roads, no bridges, no map, just grass, trees, animals that may or may not want to eat you, and one enormous problem: a river. Not a cute little stream you can jump over in sandals. This thing is wide, cold, fast, brown with mud. The current is dragging branches downstream like they weigh nothing. Somewhere below the surface, there are rocks waiting to break an ankle. And on the other bank, food, safer ground, maybe the rest of your group. So what do? Because you cannot call an engineer, you cannot build a suspension bridge, and apparently, according to the popular version of history, boats have not been invented yet. Are you stuck forever? Well, no. And the answer is much stranger than early humans waited until someone invented a canoe. Because long before humans built proper boats, we had already become surprisingly good at solving the river problem. Sometimes with our own bodies, sometimes with trees, sometimes with ice, sometimes by taking routes so sneaky that they barely looked like crossings at all. And maybe most importantly, the evidence suggests some ancient humans crossed stretches of open sea so early that the story gets awkward for anyone who thinks prehistoric people were just wandering around cluelessly. So, how did early humans cross rivers before boats existed? The short answer is they walked, waded, swam, floated, climbed, improvised, and occasionally made decisions that would make modern safety instructors faint. But the longer answer tells us something huge about human intelligence. First, we need to clear up one big misunderstanding. Before boats existed does not mean humans did not use wood in water. Think dugout canoe, a tree trunk hollowed out, shaped, balanced, and made useful for travel. Archaeologists have found very ancient examples. The Pesse canoe from the Netherlands, for example, is often dated to around 10,000 years ago. It was made from a hollowed pine trunk, but humans were dealing with rivers hundreds of thousands, probably millions of years before that, and they did not need a polished canoe to discover one basic fact: wood floats. That sounds hilariously obvious now, but think about what it means if you are carrying a child, food tools, and absolutely no desire to be swept into a crocodile's lunch plan. A fallen tree is not a boat in the fancy sense, but it can be a bridge, a raft, a handhold, a very primitive please do not die device. And people probably learned it the same way humans learn almost everything important, by watching the world, trying things, and seeing what happens when somebody else goes first. Imagine rain pounding the ground for days, a river bursts over its banks, trees tumble in, branches catch against rocks, mud creates temporary islands. The river is suddenly dangerous, but also full of clues. Animals know those clues too. Large mammals often cross rivers at shallow, calmer points. Elephants can swim. Deer wade. Herds search for fords, which are places shallow enough to walk through. Ancient humans were not helpless observers. They hunted animals, followed them, watched where they traveled, and learned the landscape in ridiculous detail. If a herd crosses in one place again and again, that spot becomes valuable information. Not a written map, a living map. And this may have been the most common answer of all. Early humans simply did not cross at the most dramatic point. They followed the river until it changed. Rivers are not solid walls. They bend, they split, they spread into wetlands. They become shallow over gravel beds. In dry seasons, they shrink. In cold regions, they freeze. Near their headwaters, they can become narrow enough to step across. So if you see a raging river and imagine prehistoric humans bravely charging straight into it every day, they probably didn't do that. They were not stupid. They were experts at not wasting energy. A group could travel upstream for hours or even days, looking for the right place. Water low enough to wade, currents slow enough to resist, rocks stable enough to stand on, and banks gentle enough for children and injured people. That is not glamorous, but survival rarely is. The smartest river crossing is often the one nobody remembers because nothing exciting happened. Everybody got wet up to the knees, nobody drowned, everyone kept walking. But here is where it gets more interesting. Some waterways could not be bypassed so easily. Flooded plains, deep channels, seasonal surges, rivers with steep banks. And in Africa, Asia, and Europe, humans and their ancestors often lived near water because water meant animals, plants, fish, stone resources, and drinking water. So avoiding rivers forever was not an option. At some point, someone had to get in. Now, humans are actually decent swimmers, at least compared with many land animals. We can hold our breath, coordinate our limbs, and float better than people often realize. Human bodies contain air-filled lungs, and fat tissue is less dense than water. Relaxed bodies can float. But can float is very different from can safely swim across a cold, fast river while carrying a baby. That is where technique matters. A person can use a branch or log as support. They can tie bundles of reeds together. They can cling to a naturally floating trunk. They can cross as a group, helping smaller or weaker members. They can carry tools above water or stash them first, then retrieve them later. None of this requires a boat builder with a workshop. It requires observation, cooperation, and a willingness to treat a river like a problem that can be solved. And ancient humans were extremely good at solving problems. We know this because of the things they made. Stone tools appear in the archaeological record more than 3.3 million years ago. By hundreds of thousands of years ago, humans were making increasingly sophisticated tools, controlling fire in at least some settings, hunting large animals, and moving through wildly different environments. That does not prove exactly how every river was crossed. Archaeology almost never gives us a neat sign saying, "Grog, use this log on Tuesday." Wood decays, reeds disappear, rope rots. Temporary rafts leave almost nothing behind. The most common solutions were probably the least likely to survive as evidence. But we can infer behavior from what humans accomplished. They spread across continents. They reached places separated by major rivers. They survived landscapes shaped by flooding, glaciers, wetlands, and coastlines. And then they did something that turns the river question into a much bigger mystery. They reached islands. Now, hold on. Crossing a river on a log is one thing. Crossing open sea is a completely different level of how did they even do that? And yet, evidence from islands in Southeast Asia suggests very early humans somehow made sea crossings. One famous case is Flores, an Indonesian island known for the tiny human relative Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbit species. Stone tools on Flores indicate hominins were there by at least around 1 million years ago, possibly earlier depending on the site and dating. But Flores was not connected to mainland Asia even when sea levels were lower during ice ages. That means somebody, or perhaps several accidental somebodies, crossed water, not a river, a sea gap. Scientists still debate exactly how this happened. Could individuals have been swept out on natural rafts of vegetation after storms or tsunamis? It is possible. Big mats of tangled plants and trees can float. Animals have reached islands that way. But there's a catch. Getting swept out to sea is not the same as establishing a population on an island. To do that, enough individuals need to arrive, survive, reproduce, and keep going. One accidental castaway does not build a long-term population. A small group or repeated arrivals becomes much more plausible, which raises a wild possibility. Perhaps very early humans used simple watercraft long before the archaeological record preserves a recognizable boat. Not elegant canoes, not Viking ships, maybe logs, bamboo rafts, bundles of vegetation, simple platforms, things made from materials that vanish almost completely after thousands of years. And if that sounds too advanced, remember, bamboo floats, reeds float, logs float. You don't need to understand naval engineering to notice that a bundle of floating things supports weight better than one sad stick. But then the story gets even wilder. Modern humans reached Australia at least 50,000 years ago, and some research supports an even earlier arrival, perhaps around 60 to 70,000 years ago. Australia was never connected to Southeast Asia by a dry land bridge. Even during lower sea levels, a chain of islands remains separated by stretches of ocean. Archaeologists called this region Wallacea. To reach Sahul, the ancient landmass that joined Australia and New Guinea when sea levels were lower, people had to cross water, real water. In some routes, the next island could be visible. In others, the journey involved crossing horizons where land may not have been easy to see. Currents mattered, wind mattered, timing mattered, navigation mattered. This was not falling off a beach and hoping for the best. It strongly suggests intentional travel by water. Think about the mental steps involved. You need to build something that stays afloat. You need to put people, perhaps food, tools, and children on it. You need to launch without instantly flipping over. You need to understand currents well enough not to drift into nowhere. And you need to believe that reaching the other side is possible, even when the other side might be beyond the horizon. That last part is huge. It means imagination, the ability to act on something you cannot see yet. And suddenly the question is no longer, how did early humans cross a river? It becomes, when did humans first look at water and stop seeing a barrier? Because water is terrifying. It is cold, unpredictable, and often full of things with teeth. It can carry you away without leaving footprints. It erases evidence. It separates families, territories, food sources, and entire worlds. But water also connects. A river can be a highway if you understand it. A floating log can be a tool. A seasonal flood can create new routes. A coastline can become a migration corridor. And every successful crossing opens up a new patch of land filled with unfamiliar food, unfamiliar predators, unfamiliar weather, and opportunities nobody on the old side could reach. That changed human history. Consider how often rivers shaped where ancient people lived. Major rivers offered drinking water, fish, birds, plants, animal crossings, and rich soil. They attracted life, but they also divided landscapes. Crossing them meant access to a new hunting ground, a new source of stone for tools, a safer camp, a mate from another group, a place to escape drought, conflict, or predators. In other words, river crossings were not just survival stunts, they were social technology. A group that could cross water more reliably could move farther, trade farther, meet other groups, and recover from disasters more easily. That flexibility may have mattered enormously as climates changed, and climates changed constantly. During ice ages, huge amounts of water were locked in ice sheets, sea levels fell, coastlines moved. Some rivers changed course or became braided with many channels. Other regions became dry. Then the ice melted, sea levels rose, and familiar landscapes disappeared underwater. For people living through it, the map never stood still. The best survivors were not necessarily the strongest person in the group. They may have been the ones who remembered where the river became shallow after the dry season, the ones who knew which trees made the best floating supports, the ones who could read the behavior of birds, fish, clouds, and animals, the ones who could convince everyone else that yes, this terrifying plan might actually work. And that takes communication. Maybe not language exactly like ours at first, but coordination, teaching, imitation, trust. You do not get 10 people onto a flimsy raft by screaming, "Everybody do whatever." You need shared expectations. You need someone saying, in whatever form early humans said it, "Hold this, stay low, wait for my signal, do not stand up." That's why river crossings may reveal more than bravery. They reveal planning. They reveal culture, knowledge passed from one person to another, not encoded in DNA, but stored in memory, gesture, habit, and stories. And unlike a sharp rock, that knowledge could improve every generation. Someone discovers that a long log is stable if you sit low. Someone else adds branches. Someone binds reeds with plant fiber. Someone figures out that crossing at dawn is calmer than crossing after rain. Someone notices that a certain cove protects against waves. Tiny upgrades, massive consequences. This is the human superpower in its earliest form, not one genius inventing everything, but groups accumulating useful ideas. A river does not care how smart you feel. It will punish bad timing, bad footing, overconfidence, and loose knots with zero mercy. So early water travel would have been shaped by failure too. Some crossings failed. People were injured, tools were lost, groups turned back. The archaeological record mostly preserves the survivors, which can make prehistory look more confident than it really was. But failure teaches. And eventually, what began as a desperate way to cross a narrow stream could become a tradition of movement across lakes, rivers, coasts, and finally open water. So did early humans cross rivers before boats existed? Absolutely. Usually, they probably did it in the simplest way possible. They found a ford. They waited for low water. They followed animals. They waded together. They used stones, fallen trees, branches, or floating debris. When conditions demanded more, they likely improvised with whatever floated. And long before we have preserved wooden canoes, some human groups may have already been making crude watercraft from natural materials, especially in places where water stood between them and a new world. The funny part is that the first boat may not have looked like a boat at all. It may have been a log someone refused to let go of, a mat of reeds tied together by anxious hands, a tree trunk pushed into a river by people who had no idea they were beginning one of the most important journeys in human history. Because every continent humans entered, every island they reached, every new landscape they learned to survive in, somewhere along the way there was water saying, "You cannot go any farther." And humans looked at it and said, "Watch us."